So the lecture which I am going to, in continuation of the previous lectures, how the relationship of logic and mathematics in the Russellian way, and how Russell's way he tried to understand logic vis-a-vis mathematics. He also the maybe the implied part of it, how the Russellian way of looking at logic and language and the interrelations between them. Maybe the his famous papers like on denoting, on descriptions, and his famous book Inquiring into Meaning and Truth, how he construed the symbolization of words or language and the meaning associated with it, how we associate a particular word with a particular symbol, not only in the logical sense but in the commonsensical sense, in the way how we how not only grammarians see language, but also how language is being constructed in the commonsensical sense, in the wider cultural aspects, how the words, the meaning of the words, the symbolization of meaning of the words. So it's a larger debate also, how the origin of language and how humans may have evolved language as a part of evolutionary process, where maybe if you have a Darwinian way of looking also at language, maybe language may be one of the evolutionary, the abstraction of language, abstraction of humans to come up with some entity called language, and how they could just the very words, how whether it was an evolutionary process or it was like if it's not an evolutionary process designed to adapt humans in the evolutionary ladder, or maybe like the way when we say in the biblical sense or in the non-logical sense, that things evolved ex nihilo. For example, when we say that in the first place there was this word. So the existence of language or words was out there. It was not an evolutionary process. Be as it may be, whatever the debate as it has been, but whether what I'm going to emphasize in this lecture is how the relationship of logic and language, how they interface with each other in the Russellian sense. And when we construct, when we have his particular logical understanding of mathematics and how it influenced the linguistic part of it, the language aspect of it. So can we construct the language in the logical sense or not? How much it is as a part of human endeavor? How did it evolve? Not only Russell, Frege, Russell, maybe other people also, and the way we construct mathematics as such. So the way we have words, we have words, and words we have, they correspond, we symbolize words, and these words are symbolizing some particular meaning. We have words, we have sentences, but normally in mathematics or in logic, normally we talk of prepositions, and how for example how these prepositions they have linguistic connotations, but seen from the logicist way of looking at propositions. Propositions are some words or sentences you can give meaning in a very rigid sense. So in a logical understanding of things, we have relations, we have propositions, we have inductions, and we have deductions. So when we associate meanings to the propositions, and when we go from one propositions and deductions thereof, so logically there should not be blind alleys in a sense. So two propositions should have, if they are bound by certain restrictive relations, they should be bound by those very restrictions only, which may not be necessarily true for the commonsensical understanding of the language which we are having. And Russell has maybe very much, if you read his book Logic and Knowledge, he is very much the various ways trying to emphasize this point again and again. Maybe he is also trying to say, for example, when he talks, for example, on denoting, maybe when we give, how can we denote meaning to the words and sentences? So can we sometimes lead to absurdities or absurd conclusions or meaningless conclusions? And how much is that valid part of reasoning? For example, he would say whether present king of France is bald. So does it this sentence make sentence or meaning? Does this sentence make any meaning or not? But if you say that present king, so king doesn't exist in our present times. We have not the monarchies were existing in the 17th century France or not. So even though the sentence may be seem to be carrying sense in that sense, but it may not be correct in the when we associate the meaning of time and order into it. So if you take time, existence of time, so it may not seem that relevant. So in the logic of relations, for example, when we have whether it's transitivity, whether it is symmetry, whether it is when we impose various relations to it, we also have certain things like conjunctive sentences, disjunctive sentences, or not. So there are various. So how we construct the broader language as such, and we symbolize them with certain meanings, and how, as part of logical constructions, they can be valid or not, or whether once we take for example, there is also something called syntax and or something called semantics. So however, when we go from the syntactical understanding of things to the and giving semantic understanding of things, how there's a lot of residue which is left in the process of symbolization of meanings and associated with those very words or sentences or propositions which is there. For example, to quote Russell when he says, everyone is at liberty to build up his own logic, that is his own form of language, as he wishes. All that is required of him is that if he wishes to discuss it, he must state his methods clearly and give syntactical rules instead of philosophical arguments. So maybe the philosophical argument sometimes, maybe these things have been discussed in Wittgenstein also. For example, philosophy is something, in philosophy we talk of clarifications. So philosophy is above or below science, it is not science also. So in philosophy it can go, you can go haywire, you can go whichever way you can reason. But once we are in the domain of logic, or once we are trying to logicize language, we have a syntactical understanding of, so your conclusions may be rigid by the rules which we are going to impose them, which should not be, which in principle can be free as much, but once we are going to apply them, they have to be rigid to the rules which we are going through, which we apply them, and then the game starts there and then. Now, so the question arises how the arithmeticization of syntax, for example, the Phrygian program of logicizing arithmetic and Russellian program of logicizing all of mathematics. So, but if we take even if ultimately mathematical statements can be, if there's an axiomatic or formal understanding of mathematics, but if you can say the propositional understanding of mathematics, they are ultimately those axioms, they are also some propositions. So how we can arithmeticize or the syntactical understanding of how we give, for example, mean how the structure of these various sentences, or so arithmeticization of syntax. So what is logic? So what is, if before I'm going to talk of arithmeticization of syntax, means what is logical syntax? So by logical syntax of a language, so it's better to just what is logic, what do you mean by logical syntax before taking the logicization of arithmetic or logicization of mathematics, and then syntaxization of arithmetic. So what is syntax? So by logical syntax of language, we mean a formal theory of linguistic forms of that language, the systematic statement of the formal rules which govern it, together with the development of consequences which follow from these rules. A theory, a rule, a definition, or likes to be called formal when no reference is made on it either to meaning of symbols, for example the words, or sense of expressions, for example sentences, but simply and solely the kind and order of the symbols from which expressions are constructed. So it's a broad way how we try to describe syntax. So if we have this very way of understanding the syntax, so in this, if we say this is the way we understand syntax, so and logicize syntax, so then logic will become part of a syntax, provided the latter is conceived in sufficiently wide sense and formulated with exactitude. So there should be some exactitude to associate it with it. So further, for example, I'll just quote Carnap in the debate. For example, when he says, for nearly in his logical syntax of language, when he says, for nearly a century, mathematicians and logicians have been strung hard to make logic an exact science. Philosophy is to be replaced by logic of science, that is to say, by logical analysis of concepts and sentences of sciences. For the logic of science is nothing other than logical syntax of the language of the science. So this is how he gives, maybe he is emphasizing the importance of the syntax, and the logical syntax of the, he's emphasizing the construction of logical syntax in the language of science or linguistics, which later has been maybe very much formulated in the theories of Chomsky and maybe modern day understanding of computer science and other things. So before what this is syntax part of it. So before I go to so for example, language in general sense, in the Russellian sense. So for what is one is the language as an expression. So language, for example, serves three purposes: to indicate facts, to express the state of speaker, and to alter the state of hearer. So these are maybe three broad purposes of language in our maybe utilitarian sense, whatever you may want to say. And once we are associated with language, but language as a, for example, normally language as a how we can use language to arrive at something which we normally call truth, the truth of physics, truth of mathematics, truth of philosophy. So the truth content of the language. So language as a tool, or language as an end in itself. So maybe the relationship of, for example, truth and falsifiable with regard to the how we use language. But you have to have how we can verify things. For example, when we talk of truth, our knowledge is to be, for example, And truth is maybe in the Gettier sense the justified true belief. But if we take the belief system in terms of words and in terms of sentences and in terms of language, for example, there are, in Russellian sense, there are words and sentences which may be true, which may not be true, but it may be, those may be facts. And the relationship of how we can arrive at truth or meaningful sentences or factual sentences, and how we can differentiate them, even not only logically but linguistically. It may be a, it's a it's what I should say, it's a job which as a logician you should be able to somehow clear for us. So how we are going to say, when we say truth is justified, true belief is knowledge is justified true belief. Truth is more sense. So for example, when we talk of when we talk of beliefs having certain kinds of relation to some occurrences which in general is non-linguistic, and there are principles of logical inferences, principles of no extra logical inferences. So truth is wider than knowledge in two respects. So there are two sentences. If we accept the law of excluded middle, as to which we have no opinion whatever sound. Second, there are two sentences which we believe and yet do not know, because we have arrived at them from faulty reasoning. Truth and false are decided are predicates, primarily beliefs, and dramatically suggest true is a wider concept than verifiable, and in fact cannot be defined in terms of verifiability. Maybe these truth, facts, right, truths, facts, knowledge, and true sentences, false sentences, and logical sentences. So these very things are very essential ingredients of how we construct the syntax of the knowledge, syntax of the sentences, or and then the language itself. So maybe there are, for example, there are some things like maybe so now I'm coming. So again, use of these very words, sentences, truth of sentences, the syntax and semantic, the syntactical part of it. So maybe, so how is, for example, to quote Russell, for example, many so-called sentences or metaphysics are not easily recognized to be pseudo statements. The fact that natural languages allow the formation of a meaningless sequence of words without isolating the rules of grammar indicate that grammatical syntax is, from a logical point of view, inadequate. So maybe that's what I was saying. Maybe when we construct the grammatical way of looking at things and the logical way of looking at things may not necessarily intersect. Sometimes grammatically you may, so you can in natural language or commonsensical languages, you can, there's a lot of freedom to it. You can construct or you can swing words and sentences in a way by which you can also construct sentences which may not seem not logical. Maybe the logical way of looking at language and the grammatical The natural language, so the logical understanding and the grammatical understanding may sometimes or may sometimes not poor to a given point. So maybe the post maybe Russellian understanding of, so if you read maybe a tractus of Wittgenstein and the preface of it, Russell has been gone very much. He is very much been emphatic on the influence of Wittgenstein on his own doctrines, and how he has revisited them time and again. And the time at which this tractus was written, 1914-15, maybe the difficulty of writing it, the preface in absence of Wittgenstein, maybe had compounded it. There's a lot of problems. But maybe one thing, maybe Wittgenstein has maybe lot of paradoxes of Russell, which Russell considers paradoxes. Wittgenstein offhand says that they are not in the first place paradoxes in some of the sentences which he is quoting. So how I am connecting it with the Russellian way of looking at language is basically, maybe if for example, if I quote so for example, particularly when Wittgenstein says, a sign is what can be perceived of a symbol. A sign language that is governed by a logical grammar, by the logical snake. The conceptual notation of Russell and Frege is such a language, though it's true. It fails to exclude all mistakes. So a sign does not determine a logical form unless it takes together the logico-syntactical employment. If a sign is useless, it's meaningless. That's the point of if a sign is useless, it's meaningless. That's the point of Ockman's maxim. In logical syntax, the meaning of sign never plays a role. It's impossible to establish logical syntax without maintaining the meaning of a sign. So maybe here Wittgenstein is not maybe totally. He finds the Russellian and the Fregean way of looking at symbolization and meaning to those. It's not all encompassing. There is something left to it. So maybe for example, when Wittgenstein said, what cannot be said in words cannot be said at all, and what we cannot say by words must pass in silence, he has famously said. Or there can be I think everything in the world can be there is logic to it, and logic encompasses the logical statements or the world of logic encompasses all there is in the world. So to say something is outside the world it is not logical. So somehow the propositional statements which Russell took, and how Wittgenstein extended the propositional statements with the logic associated with them, has a certain metaphysics associated with it, which in the maybe in the positivistic sense, the logical positivist, maybe they will not exclude all metaphysical possibilities outside the domain of facts. So in the same way, the domain of logic by which the world is constructed, so in the Wittgensteinian sense, and the way we give meaning to those propositions which are going to describe the world in a logical way, so inferences from them or deductions from them will be logical in a sense that there should not be something outside those very logical the systems by which we construct world, or we want to explain the things. So nothing will exist outside that domain. So for example, given set of propositions, if you are going to start with the propositions, they should not explain things which lie outside the domain of the propositions which we have started with. So if the world is constructed out of logic, how we want to understand world is logic, and world has logic to it, and it can be explained logically. So you cannot arrive at something illogical things, or you cannot arrive at supernaturalism from a natural statement, supernatural statement from a natural statement. So for example, so if you say, so I'm just these are so I'll just maybe there are some for example, in theory of descriptions, I'll just connect with it now, coming back to what is theory of descriptions. So Russell's idea of meaning is referential. A symbol has a meaning if it stands for something, and that the thing for which it stands is meaning. So this is how he describes in the theory, how Russell's idea of meaning: a symbol has a meaning if it stands for something, and the thing for which it stands is its meaning. So this is how he just symbolizes and the construction of meanings with regard to those symbols. But one problem maybe once in the theory of denoting also, maybe. So the important part of it is that there have been various difficulties associated with it. So how once you give a symbol to the meanings to the something, so does that symbol encompass the meaning and the symbol? So does that meaning which we give associate meaning to those symbols, does it encompass the meaning in its totality or not, or is there something which is left always, or there is always that if you want to make things precise, you cannot make it precise in an exact sense. So there are paradoxes maybe or associated with it. So for example, in his Russell, in his autobiography, when he claims, for example, that in 1905 the theory of description, while attempting to solve the logic and semantic paradoxes, playing his work on the foundations method of mathematics. For example, what he says in his paper, I hope to make connection between his work on the paradoxes and the theory of descriptions, and his theory of incomplete symbols generally clearer. In particular, I argue that the theory of descriptions arose from the realization not only can a class not be thought of as a single thing, neither can the meaning, intention of an expression capable of singling out the collection class of things as opposed to another. So if this is right, it shows that Russell's method of solving the logical paradoxes is wholly incompatible with anything like Fregean dualism between sense and reference, meaning and denotation. So this is what I am trying to say. Maybe, and Russell famously describes what a number is a class of all those classes which are similar to it. So there is a lot of, so when he says there are similar to it, so how can be that common denominator by which we can have a referential to that number? So there is always scope of maybe not coming to something common denomination. You can never achieve it when we try to give meaning to those very numbers. So what is that common denotation or denomination, for example, which led to various problems, for example, or various paradoxes, for example, maybe in set theory as well as logic, for example, which led to the debates. For example, isn't set theory a part of mathematics isn't theory. Bertrand Russell intended to make use of classes in their logicist reduction of mathematics. Isn't set theory a part of mathematics, not logic proper? And wouldn't this at best amount to reducing to one of the subdisciplines? Russell's theory of incomplete symbols, including the theory of descriptions, emerged in part from realization forced upon by his paradoxes that not only can a class not be thought of as a single thing, which is what I was saying, not only can a class be thought of as a single thing, neither can the meaning or intention of any expression capable of singling out one collective class as opposed to the other. I contend that the heart of Russell's solution to the paradox is not the theory of types, but rather the view that the words or phrases that apparently stand for the kind of entities that give rise to paradoxes are not to be taken as on face value. In his logical symbolism, Russell hoped to preserve an isomorphism between its formula and propositions expressed as much as possible. So maybe this is what this author came and see. He's trying to have his own viewpoint. Maybe how Russell could have also avoided the exact maybe isomorphism of meanings which we give symbols, and not leading to a common denomination by which we can represent a class is a problem in a perpetuation, which leads to some paradoxes. And one of the way of it is solving it is that the words or phrases apparently stand for the kind of entities that give rise to paradox are not to be taken at face. They have not to be taken at face value. So we cannot give the way we associate number. Have not to take them. They have a certain place value also, rather than having only face value. One is not one. Maybe in the Russellian sense, Socrates and Plato are not two. Socrates is Socrates, Plato is Plato. So when we are going to go into how we construct what is the definition of number, when we are trying to understand those definitions in some. So further to elucidate it, for example, in Grayling's passage of on denoting, Russell argues that, for example, any attempt to disambiguate between meaning and denotation leads to an inextricable tangles and must ultimately be fail. His reasoning is obscure. Suppose that there are some formal means for speaking of denoting a complex itself as opposed to its denotation. Either it's coherent to disambiguate between meaning and denotation, denoting complex and what it denotes, or it is not. If it's possible to disambiguate, the paradoxes of denoting complex can be formulated resulting in contradictions. It's not possible to disambiguate the entire theory, differentiating the incoherent. Either way, the meaning denotation distinction must be rejected. So maybe what he's in the Grayling's. So when you try to denote something, so there is something which is you cannot left. If you want to make one thing clear, the opposite things, the clarity is, you have to sacrifice clarity for something else. So if you disambiguate something, maybe the contradictions become more. They come to fore. If you make contradictions less, but the ambiguities become pronounced. So it's like that Godelian thing, or principles of uncertainty, that you cannot make a system consistent, and you cannot formalize it also simultaneously, or you cannot it cannot be complete in the same breath also. So maybe if this Grayling's paradox, if it can be, for example, taken in the, for example, Godelian sense, for example, Godel showed that G is demonstrated, means how to construct an arithmetical formula that represents a mathematical statement in the linguistic sense. Godel showed that G is demonstrated if and if only that the formal negation G is demonstrable. This step in argument is again analogous to that of a Richidian paradox, in which it is proved that N is Richidian if and only if N is not Richidian. So if a formula and its negation are both formally demonstrated, the arithmetical calculus is not consistent. So this is how we have, so Godelian understanding of things had also influence on the linguistic understanding of how we have a linguistic understanding of things also. So we have a Greeling's paradox. So there's also a Godelian way of there's also something called maybe incompleteness. So there the inherent difficulties of maybe language, symbolization of language, denotation of meaning to those symbols, when we try to arrive at something which is not ambiguous. So what are the fallouts of it? We have to accept something which is not desirable. The same way those very things are maybe the Godelian or the Richidian things, they may be elucidating these difficulties of on denoting of Russell's paper. So in that way sense, there can be a formal relationship between the two. So G proved that if that G is not formally demonstrable, it is neither is true arithmetical form. G is both true and formally undecipherable. The axioms of arithmetic are incomplete. So now maybe I'm going to come to the point of linguistics and symbolization. So it was to be due to the no, maybe the very one thing which I was not the difference of maybe Frege, maybe the debate of maybe Frege, and maybe the debate is being more pronounced between Frege and Hilbert. So as it is between Frege and Russell. So maybe the giving the use of how we symbolize or give meaning to the symbols, which may be words or which may be propositions in the logical sense. So how should there be some duality to it, or should the distinction of what I should say distinction be allowed, which will allow that vagueness in terms of understanding of those maybe which will allow that freedom to what we construct a class in its what we construct a class in itself, which we not have a common denomination. For example, Frege in his essay on foundation, he rejects the notion of interpretation. The word interpretation is, for Frege, the word interpretation is objectionable, for when properly expressed, a thought leaves no room for different interpretations. He argues against the view that propositions can be subject to interpretations, to which Hilbert replied, I believe that your view of the nature and the purpose of symbolism in mathematics is exactly right. I agree, especially that symbolism must come later, and in response to a need, from which it follows, of course, that whoever wants to create or develop a symbol must first study these needs. So at that point, at least, there is that much agreement between Hilbert and Frege on the role of symbolism. So maybe prior to giving a meaning or associating meaning to the symbols, so Hilbert is very much conscious of the fact on what that symbolism is to be applied to. While in case of Frege, maybe Frege has a different way of looking. He doesn't want to have maybe he thinks that for example, He thinks that he argues that a proposition can how he argues that the view that a proposition can be subject to the word interpretation is objectionable for when properly a thought leaves no room for different interpretation. So the freedom of interpreting a given symbols. So how it is to be tackled? Hilbert would want to tackle it in a sense that he wants to address the meaning of those symbols, how he wants to maybe narrow down the distinction of symbols and meanings is by assigning a particular need. Maybe in this case was the how he understood foundations of geometry. He has tried to when he in the way of formalization of things, so how he sees things, so whether those very Euclidean systems or non, so he has a particular way of looking at those very things. And in point of Russell, maybe he's, I may not be right entirely, but he may be between his point of view, maybe between, if you can say, his point of view can be better understood by understanding both of these viewpoints of the problems of giving difficulties of meaning to symbols and propositions, the mapping to it. So maybe I'll just the way so the discussion was largely in the sense maybe why not, maybe I'll this Russell's way of post-Russellian, post-Wittgensteinian and post-Gödelian way of looking at language, logic, mathematics, maybe grammar. So it has maybe led to a large program of maybe Chomskyan linguistics, and maybe I'm not going to touch this very thing, but the goal of, for example, there is a good essay, the goal of a generative enterprise, for example. So it has been maybe influenced very much by these very developments in logic and mathematics. So, for example, so I'll just touch it only briefly, and then. So, for example, Chomsky has constructed a formal theory of grammar, leading to the discovery of underlying linguistic structure and explored its foundations. He has developed cognitive epistemological interpretations of theory, leading to an understanding of human language as a component of mind-brain with substantial innate content, hence central to the cognitive psychology and human biology. Contributed a series of major proposals for the computational system of language, including both grammatical operations and grammatical constructions on their operations and input. Re-evaluated the theory of grammar in terms of questions about language design, raising the possibility of empirical proposals about language faculty as a biological entity with general properties of efficient computation that instantiate more abstract notions of simplicity and economy. Maybe these are how the Chomskyan understanding of generative grammar, where he has seen that there is something innateness associated with the grammatical aspects of which things. So there is so language is something. There is innateness to the fundamental aspects of the language. So which will basically take when we take there is something innateness. I want to connect it with something a priori and posteriori. In the Kantian classification or bifurcation, classification of things in terms of posteriori and the a priori, and in the constructions of Euclidean and non-Euclidean geometry, in the constructions of maybe not only posteriori, a priori, but also in the construction of synthetic and analytical statements. So, whether those very propositions are synthetic a prioriness which is associated with it, synthetic a prioriness of the propositions, are connected with the when we talk of sentences and when we talk of giving syntactical references to those sentences, they will definitely correspond some meaning associated with the some meanings associated with what I should say, some meaning associated with the empirical aspects of the world, which we are going to refer to them, things to them. So so this is one part of it. So maybe so I'm just so this is one part of it. You can do it other part of it. Maybe there is also it's the Chomskyan tradition, and how we can, I have not, maybe it's a huge study how things have developed. Maybe things are, people are, linguistics are, they are continuously what is day in and out, day out revisiting their theories maybe. But one thing is that the relationship of logic, language, syntax, semantics, and how we can take it to the Russellian, maybe his books, analysis of inquiry into meaning of truth, and maybe his doctrines of logical atomism and his various essays. So how we can trace these developments to those very developments also. And maybe in the recent sense, the way Pinker has trying to localize language as a part of social and cultural, as a social and cultural construct, and how not only sociological and cultural construct, but the evolution of language in terms of sounds. It's not only you symbolize words and meanings with the rigidity of mapping, which is being constructed via logic, but once we also associate words with sounds, and how the theory of how linguistics as a subject has developed, and what is the diversity of language on the planetary scale. How can we and there can be the, beneath all these diversities, there is maybe some underlying unity to those very things. How that diversity can also be explained, and the underlying notions of the trying to understand language not only as an analytical construct, but in the strict logical and mathematical sense, which would impose a sort of objectivity in a logical sense. But maybe there's also objectivity or underlying unity in the larger sense of language, not only language but many languages. Or there can be a innately universal language which is there, which we can decipher it. And maybe that universal language how we can maybe relate with our notions of language in the logical sense. So I would rather summarize it. I would rather try to summarize it. I would rather summarize it maybe. Summarize it. I would rather summarize it. Maybe there are some. I will just quote some sentences of maybe Russell. Maybe I would rather say maybe this lecture I have not been that much. Maybe I have tried to understand things. Maybe I want to convey some flavor of how maybe logic and language. How they interface in the Russellian sense, and how it has maybe how things have maybe evolved post Russell. It's how things have evolved post Russell. It's also huge, but the developments can be traced to the debates of earlier part of maybe 19th century of Frege, Russell, maybe Wittgenstein, Godel. So these how we also understand the fundamental structure of language as such, and whether grammatical understanding and the logical understanding of things, whether they somehow we can exchange those very understandings or not, and what are the difficulties when we try to give meaning to when we symbolize and give meaning to the sentences or propositions, and the residual part of it, what is left, and even the ambiguities which are there, which lead to which also led to the developments in set theory maybe. So these are maybe these are enough reasons to maybe at least have a look into the this aspect of study, the interface of language and logic. Stop.